My name is Zara Malik. At Next Core Labs, I was the one they called when the servers crashed, when the Wi-Fi died 5 minutes before a pitch, when the entire system froze and panic filled the room. But officially, I was just the IT girl. The one who fixed cables. The one who stayed late. The one nobody noticed, until something broke. Then one day, in front of the entire team, my CEO leaned back in his glass office, smirked, and said, "Maybe the real IT issue is you." By the end of that afternoon, I was fired. Escorted out. Access revoked. Slack deactivated. They thought they had removed the problem. What they didn't know was this. The building their flashy startup operated from. The lease they could barely afford 3 years ago. The silent investor who kept the lights on. Was me. And 30 days later, I wouldn't just be unemployed. They would be homeless. The morning everything fell apart started like any other. At Next Core Labs, chaos was normal. Screens flickered, Slack notifications exploded, and someone was always shouting about a deadline. And like always, I was already there before everyone else. Coffee in one hand, laptop open, monitoring the servers. My name is Zara Malik, and for 3 years, I built their entire infrastructure from scratch. But to them, I was just IT. That morning was important. A major investor demo. Months of hype. The CEO had been bragging all week about revolutionizing the industry. The conference room was polished, the glass walls spotless, the team dressed like they were already on the cover of Forbes. Then, 10 minutes before the demo, the main server froze. One screen went black. Then another. Slack stopped loading. And just like that, panic exploded. "Zara!" Someone yelled from across the room. I was already moving. I logged into the back end remotely and immediately saw the issue. A third-party integration had pushed an automatic update overnight. It was conflicting with our core system. Something I had warned about 2 weeks ago in an email no one responded to. "I need 5 minutes," I said calmly. But 5 minutes in startup time feels like 5 hours. The CEO stormed out of his office, expensive watch flashing under the lights. "What's happening?" he demanded. "Server conflict," I replied. "I can roll it back." The investor was already seated. The CEO's jaw tightened. He didn't ask for details. He didn't ask for solutions. Instead, he looked at the room. At the tension. At the embarrassment. And he needed someone to blame. He turned to me. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said loudly. "We keep having IT issues." I blinked. This isn't an internal failure. It's a vendor up. "Maybe," he interrupted, voice sharp now, "the real IT issue is you." The room went silent. No one defended me. Not the engineers who relied on my systems. Not the operations manager who called me every weekend. 5 minutes later, I had the server running again. The demo continued. But I was no longer part of it. By 3 p.m., HR called me in. "Performance concerns," they said carefully. "Access revoked. Badge deactivated. Termination effective immediately." As I packed my things, I glanced once more at the glass building, the one they were so proud of. They thought they had just fired their IT support. They had no idea they had just fired their landlord. Getting fired hurt. But not because I needed the job. It hurt because I had built Next Core Labs from nothing. 3 years ago, they couldn't even afford a proper office. 5 people. 2 folding tables. 1 dying router. The CEO had a big vision and an even bigger ego, but no money. That's when the building opportunity appeared. A newly renovated commercial space in the tech district. Perfect location. Flexible layout. Long-term growth potential. They loved it. They just couldn't qualify for the lease. Bad credit history. No stable revenue. Too risky. That's when my father stepped in. He had been a commercial real estate lawyer for over 20 years. When I mentioned the situation casually one evening, he asked one simple question. "Do you believe in the company?" At the time, I did. So we structured something quiet. Legal. Clean. Invisible. The lease would be under a private holding agreement, registered in my name. The startup would pay rent monthly, assuming the landlord was just another faceless investor who preferred anonymity. The CEO never asked questions. He was just relieved someone approved them. He shook my hand that day and said, "You just saved this company." He had no idea how literal that was. For 3 years, rent payments came in like clockwork. Sometimes late. Sometimes with excuses. But I covered gaps when needed. I protected the asset. I kept the space secure. And meanwhile, I built their servers, secured their data, optimized their systems. I was supporting the company from both sides, technically and structurally. And they never knew. The day after I was fired, I opened my laptop at home. I logged into the property management portal. Rent due date. 10 days away. I didn't send threats. I didn't make calls. I simply stopped being generous. Late fees would now apply. Policies would now be enforced. And for the first time since the company was founded, the landlord was paying attention. They thought I had lost my access. What they didn't realize was this. They had just removed the one person who had been protecting them from consequences. And consequences were very patient. The first week after I was fired, I did nothing. No angry emails. No dramatic confrontations. No revenge posts on LinkedIn. I simply watched. From home, with a cup of coffee, I monitored what I legally still could: public uptime trackers, client-facing dashboards, and yes, the rent portal. Inside Next Core Labs, things began to crack faster than I expected. They hired a new IT consultant almost immediately. A flashy contractor with a polished website and a 3-month retainer that probably cost more than my yearly bonus ever did. But there was one problem. I had built everything myself. Custom back-end scripts. Security patches layered quietly over outdated frameworks. Manual overrides only I knew how to execute under pressure. It wasn't messy. It was protective. And now no one understood it. 3 days after my departure, the first outage happened. Not major. Just a performance lag. But clients noticed. Then came the second issue. Database syncing errors between their mobile and web platforms. Something I used to monitor every night before bed. The new consultant kept requesting old documentation. There wasn't much. Because I had always been there. When the CEO received the first angry client email, he blamed legacy system inefficiencies. When the second investor asked about rising technical instability, he blamed transition adjustments. But internally, Slack channels were full of panic. Engineers started messaging each other. Did Zara build this part? Does anyone know the root access protocol? Why isn't the rollback script working? Because the rollback script required a manual verification key. And that key was deactivated the moment they revoked my access. At the end of the month, something more serious happened. Their automated billing integration glitched. Payments from premium clients didn't process correctly. Revenue froze for 48 hours. 48 hours in a startup fighting for its next funding round is not a small problem. That same evening, I received a notification. Rent payment. Delayed. 5 days past due. For 3 years, I had quietly waived late penalties. This time, I didn't. Late fee applied automatically. Formal reminder email scheduled. Professional. Polite. Unavoidable. I wasn't attacking them. I was simply no longer protecting them. And without protection, fragile systems don't survive long. They thought firing me would stabilize the company. Instead, it removed the foundation. And foundations don't collapse loudly at first. They crack quietly, until the entire structure starts to shake. The rent became 10 days late. For 3 years, I had sent gentle reminders. Friendly emails. No worries, just a small delay. I had covered them more times than they knew. This time, the system sent something different. Subject: formal notice, late payment. No emojis. No flexibility. No personal tone. Just policy. Inside Next Core Labs, the CFO walked into the CEO's glass office with a printed copy of the email. "We've never had penalties before," she said quietly. "It's probably automated," he replied, dismissing it with a wave. "Just pay it." But cash flow wasn't smooth anymore. 2 clients had paused contracts after the billing glitch. Investors were asking harder questions. The new IT consultant had just requested an extension on his contract, with higher fees. Paying rent suddenly wasn't automatic. They paid it on day 14. Late fee included. For the first time in company history, the landlord did not waive it. That bothered him. "Find out who owns this building," the CEO said during the executive meeting. "If they want to nickel and dime us, we can negotiate." But the ownership trail led exactly where it was designed to lead, a holding entity with clean paperwork and zero public profile. No face. No number. No leverage. Meanwhile, internally, cracks widened. Another outage hit during peak user hours. This one lasted nearly an hour. Social media complaints started surfacing. An investor commented publicly, "Stability is critical at this stage." The CEO felt pressure from every direction. And pressure makes people reactive. That afternoon, he posted a LinkedIn update about strengthening infrastructure and eliminating inefficiencies. The subtext was clear. He still believed firing me had been the solution. 2 days later, a second email went out from the property management system. Subject: Lease compliance reminder. This one referenced clause 8.3, repeated late payments and operational risk concerns. Still professional. Still neutral. But firmer. The CEO slammed his office door after reading it. "Who is this landlord?" he snapped. "Why are they suddenly acting like this?" Because for 3 years, I had acted like a safety net. Now I was acting like a contract. And contracts don't have emotions. They only have consequences. The building lights still shone at night. The logo still hung proudly in the lobby. The team still believed they were building something unstoppable. But above them all, quietly and legally, the power dynamic had shifted. They thought they were negotiating with a corporation. They didn't realize. They were negotiating with the woman they told was the problem. The emergency investor visit was not scheduled. It was triggered. After the 3rd outage in 2 weeks, their largest backer requested an in-person review. Not a Zoom call. Not a summary email. An inspection. The office looked perfect that morning. Fresh coffee brewing. Screens polished. Developers unusually quiet. The CEO walking around with forced confidence. "Today is about optics," he told the team. "Stay sharp." I almost smiled when I heard about it through a former engineer who still texted me occasionally. Optics don't fix architecture. Halfway through the presentation, everything seemed stable. Revenue projections on screen. Growth charts rising. A confident speech about scalability. Then one investor asked a simple question. "How resilient is your infrastructure after recent disruptions?" The CEO nodded smoothly. "We've upgraded systems and brought in new experts." Right on cue. The dashboard froze. Not fully crashed. Just stuck. Spinning wheel. No response. The room went still. The new IT consultant rushed forward, fingers flying across the keyboard. "It's a minor sync delay," he muttered. It wasn't. A background process I had once manually monitored had overconsumed server memory. It needed a controlled restart sequence. But no one in the room knew the correct order. If restarted incorrectly, it would trigger a cascade. And that's exactly what happened. One server went offline. Then another. Within 60 seconds, the entire demo environment collapsed. Silence. The investor slowly closed his laptop. The CEO's face tightened. He turned slightly, instinctively searching for someone to blame. For a split second, his eyes scanned the room. But I wasn't there anymore. And blaming someone who isn't present doesn't solve a live failure. "How long until recovery?" the investor asked calmly. The consultant hesitated. "We're assessing." That word cost them credibility. Recovery took 42 minutes. 42 long, quiet, reputation-damaging minutes. When the systems finally returned, the mood had shifted. The investor didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "Operational instability at this stage is concerning." That sentence was worse than anger. That evening, I received another notification. Rent. Pending again. 7 days late. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt certain. They weren't collapsing because I pushed them. They were collapsing because I had been holding them together. And now, no one was. Part 6, The Reveal. On the 20th day of delayed rent, I scheduled a visit. Not as an employee. Not as IT. As the landlord. I wore a tailored charcoal suit. Minimal makeup. Hair pulled back. Calm. Professional. Untouchable. Beside me walked my father's former associate, now my legal representative. When we entered the lobby of Next Core Labs, the receptionist looked confused. "Hi, can I help you?" "Yes," I replied smoothly. "We're here regarding lease compliance." Within minutes, we were escorted to the glass conference room. The same room where I had once been blamed. The CEO walked in, irritated at first. "Look, whatever this is, we've already processed." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. Confusion. Then disbelief. Then something close to panic. "You," he said. I didn't smile. My lawyer placed a folder on the table and opened it carefully. "Mr., he began calmly, "we represent the legal ownership entity of this property." The CEO looked between us. "That's not possible." I slid a single document across the table. Registered lease agreement. Property holding certificate. Owner, Zara Malik. The silence in that room was heavier than any outage. "You work here," he said slowly, like the logic might undo reality. "Worked," I corrected gently. His executive team shifted uncomfortably. The CFO grabbed the documents, scanning signatures, dates, registration stamps. It was airtight. "For 3 years. You never said anything," he whispered. "You never asked," I replied. My lawyer continued professionally. "Rent has been repeatedly delayed. Operational instability has raised risk factors under Clause 8.3 of the lease agreement." The CEO's voice sharpened. "This is retaliation." "No," I said calmly. "This is enforcement." There was no anger in my tone. That's what unsettled him most. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't vengeful. I was precise. For years, I had protected them quietly. Now I was simply stepping back and letting the contract speak. "You can't shut us down," he said, but the certainty in his voice was gone. I folded my hands on the table. "I don't need to shut you down," I said. "You're doing that on your own." Then my lawyer placed the final document in front of him. Official 30-day eviction notice. Signed. Stamped. Delivered. The power in the room had shifted completely. 3 weeks ago, he had escorted me out of this building. Today, I had given him a deadline to leave it. And this time, there was no one he could blame. The eviction notice didn't explode publicly. It spread quietly, like a crack running through glass. At first, only the executive team knew. Closed-door meetings. Tense whispers. Sudden calendar blocks labeled strategy discussion. But startups don't keep secrets well. By the end of the week, the engineers knew. Then operations. Then marketing. Is it true? Are we actually getting evicted? Wait. Zara owns the building. My phone started buzzing again. Former teammates. Junior developers. Even the product manager who once ignored my infrastructure warnings. One message stood out. "We didn't know. If we had known, things would have been different." Would they? Inside Next Core Labs, morale dropped fast. The CEO tried damage control. "This is temporary," he announced in an all-hands meeting. "We're negotiating." But there was nothing to negotiate. The lease terms were clear. Repeated late payments. Operational risk. Compliance breach. He had signed that agreement himself. Investors were notified next. That's when things turned serious. An emergency board meeting was called. Financial projections were reviewed again, this time with relocation costs added. Breaking a lease under pressure isn't cheap. Moving a tech infrastructure mid-instability is worse. One investor reportedly asked, "Why wasn't ownership structure disclosed earlier?" Good question. The CEO hadn't hidden it. He simply never cared enough to look. Meanwhile, 2 senior engineers submitted their resignations. One cited leadership instability. The other didn't give a reason. But he texted me privately. "You built the backbone." They thought it was replaceable. 3 weeks into the 30-day notice, the startup was operating in survival mode. Cash reserves were thinning. Investors were skeptical. Team confidence was fractured. And relocation options limited. No landlord loves a tenant with public outages and unstable revenue. One evening, I drove past the building. Lights were still on. Logo still glowing. But it looked different now. Smaller. Fragile. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. Power isn't loud. It's structural. And for 3 years, I had been their structure. Now they were learning what it meant to stand without it. 20 days left. And the real consequences hadn't even begun. Day 25 of the eviction notice. The pressure inside Next Core Labs had turned into something heavier than panic. It was fear. An emergency board meeting was called without the CEO's approval. That alone said everything. For the first time since founding the company, he wasn't in control of the room. The investors had done their homework. They reviewed the outages. They reviewed the late payments. They reviewed the lease. And then they reviewed me. Not the IT girl. Zara Malik, infrastructure architect. Original systems designer. Property owner. One board member asked quietly, "Why was the person who built your technical foundation terminated before a full transition?" The CEO tried to defend himself. Performance issues. Cultural misalignment. But numbers don't support ego. Revenue dips aligned exactly with my termination date. System instability began within 72 hours of my exit. Operational risk increased steadily after. One investor leaned back and said the sentence that changed everything. "This is a leadership failure." Silence. The board voted. Temporary removal of the CEO pending restructuring. Access restricted. Decision-making transferred to an interim operations head. For the first time, he wasn't the one revoking access. He was the one losing it. 2 days later, I received an email. Professional. Formal. The board requested a meeting. Not to argue about eviction. Not to threaten. To negotiate a different outcome. When I entered the conference room again, the atmosphere was different. No arrogance. No smirks. No blame. Just reality. "We miscalculated," one board member said directly. "You were foundational to both infrastructure and property stability." Another added, "We'd like to explore options." Options. That word had weight now. They weren't asking me to return as IT. They were asking whether I would consider becoming CTO, with equity, authority, and full operational oversight. In exchange, they requested one thing: pause the eviction. I didn't answer immediately. Power isn't about revenge. It's about choice. And for the first time since I walked into that building 3 years ago, I had all of it. The former CEO tried to salvage his reputation. He scheduled media interviews. Bragged about resilience under pressure. Claimed the recent outages were growing pains. But no one believed him anymore. Investors had already lost faith. The board had stripped him of decision-making power. Employees no longer respected him. The company that once revolved around his ego was now quietly running without him. 2 key engineers resigned completely, refusing to work under someone they no longer trusted. Clients demanded immediate stability plans, bypassing him entirely. I didn't need to intervene. I simply observed. The eviction notice loomed. The lease was under my name. And the building, the literal headquarters of his pride, could be taken from him legally in 5 days. The CEO tried negotiation. "Zara, we can pay, I can fix this, I interrupted calmly. You signed the agreements. You broke the terms. This isn't negotiation. It's enforcement. He realized it then. All the power he thought he had was gone. The investors had openly sided with me. The board had given me authority to stabilize operations. Even the employees, his team, were quietly thanking me behind the scenes. For 3 years, he had fired me to solve IT issues. Now, the only real issue left in the company was him. And for the first time, he knew it. Day 30 arrived. The CEO packed his office silently. Boxes stacked neatly on his desk. Awards, laptops, and glossy promotional materials that once defined his ego. He stopped at the door, looked back at the building, the one he had once ruled with arrogance, and finally saw it clearly. I was waiting outside the conference room, calm as ever. "You planned this," he said quietly, almost defeated. I shook my head. "No. I just prepared." He stared. The sentence hit harder than any legal clause or eviction notice. Inside, my lawyer finalized the property handover. Every system check, every lease term, every clause perfectly enforced. Then I walked past him, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The employees watched. Investors watched. Even the few remaining clients noticed the shift in authority. I paused at the reception desk, turning to face the CEO one last time. This building, this company. I kept it running when no one else could. And now, I said, voice steady, I'm giving it a chance to survive, properly. Outside, a new nameplate gleamed in gold letters. Zara Malik, Chief Technology Officer. Below it, smaller letters read, "Never underestimate the one who keeps the system running." And just like that, the power had shifted. The empire he thought he owned was under new management, precise, calculated, and unstoppable. The lesson was simple: you can fire the person who runs your system, but you can't fire the foundation they built.